Okay, part 4 of chapter 9. You have, of course, your energy sources. So your muscle contraction requires ATP, which is generated by oxidation of glucose or other usable nutrients. Compounds stored, of course, in your muscle cells for energy production. You have your myoglobin. Of course, this, of course, binds extra oxygen and then releases it, of course, when it is needed. So it stores your reserves of your oxygen for you. Um, Glycogen, of course, this glycogen passes from the blood into the contracted muscle fibers. So you have storage, a storage form of glucose. It's broken down, of course, to two ATP molecules. Your creatine phosphate, of course, these are your energy-rich molecules, so it stores energy. So together, the creatine phosphate and the ATP are going to provide enough energy, of course, for muscles to contract maximally for about 15 seconds. So it's sufficient, of course, for a small bursts of activity. Next, we have our aerobic metabolism. So aerobic metabolism requires oxygen, and it is used during your normal activities. So your aerobic metabolism, of course, such as in activities that last more than 10 minutes, such as aerobic system, provides more than 90% of course, the needed ATP. So at the end of a marathon race, of course, nearly 100% of the ATP is being produced, of course, by your aerobic cellular respiration. Uh, Anaerobic metabolism, of course, does not require oxygen. It is used during your strenuous activity. It's less ATP is going to be produced. Lactic acid, of course, accumulates. About 80% is going to be produced and then goes into the blood. So you have oxygen depth is going to develop. You have recovery of the oxygen consumption is going to be needed, so it provides enough energy for 30 to 40 seconds. And of course, maybe like a small run, a run of a 400-meter race, which is like 0.24 miles. So it helps with the help of your creatine phosphate. Muscle fatigue, that's the inability of a muscle to maintain force of a contraction after prolonged activity. That results mainly from changes within the muscle fibers. So your exact mechanism, of course, is unknown. They think maybe, or a theory, they think that it may be a protective mechanism to stop a person from exercising before the muscle becomes damaged. So a couple questions here. Which source provides ATP during a 1,000-meter run? That would be your aerobic metabolism, because those are in activities that will last more than 10 minutes. Which sources provide ATP during a 100-meter run? And that would be your anaerobic activity or anaerobic metabolism. So that provides enough energy for 30, 40 seconds, or like a 400-meter race would be an example of that one. So effects of aging, again, it can exercise. The effects of exercise can help with muscles and things like that as you age. So improved balance and joint flexibility as well. Exercise improves the increase in your muscle size, your hypertrophy. It increases the improvements of your muscle tissue. It improves your vasodilation of your vessels. It strengthens your heart muscle. It improves your breathing and respiratory efficiency, helps maintain your weight control, and of course allows you to have stronger bones. So as you age, exercise is important. Now we have the different types of training that you can do. So aerobic training, of course, is things like jogging, aerobic dance, things like that. This increases the supply of oxygen-rich blood available to the skeletal muscles for aerobic cellular respiration. It builds endurance, of course, for prolonged activities. So you should, with aerobic training, they say you should eat adequate amounts of protein. This will, of course, help the body to synthesize muscle proteins and then increase your muscle mass. Strength training. This relies more on your anaerobic production of ATP through glycolysis. It stimulates the synthesis of muscle proteins and result over time an increase in the muscle size, such as your muscle hypertrophy. It builds your muscle strength. So I always ask students, what is interval training? Interval training, all it is a workout regimen, of course, that incorporates both types of training. You have at different intervals. So you might have aerobic for activity for 2 minutes, maybe strength training for one, and then it alternates back and forth. Muscle tone, this is a small amount of tension in the muscle due to weak contractions of your motor units. You have small groups of motor units, of course, that are alternately active and inactive in a constantly shifting pattern to sustain muscle tone. Muscle tone, of course, keeps your skeletal muscles firm. Good posture will keep the head from slumping forward, of course, on the chest. Now we have different types of contractions. You have a concentric isotonic contraction. This tension, of course, is developed, of course, remains constant while the muscle changes its length, used for body movements and for moving objects. So in the example of this one, if you look here, this gentleman, of course, picked up a book. So it shows him picking up the book off of the table. So this is used for moving objects or body parts. Eccentric isotonic contractions. This one, of course, is the length of a muscle increases during your contraction. And an example of that is, of course, the movement of lowering the book or object. Isometric contraction, this is the tension generated is not enough for the object to be moved and the muscle does not change its length. So what the person is doing, they're still working on their muscles, but they're just holding a book steady using an outreached arm. Some people call this like an isometric hold. So it's holding a position, of course, with a weighted object. Okay, some examples or some checkpoint questions here. Number one, again, try to answer these on your own first, and then if you can't answer them, I'll give you the answers. So number one, blank is decreased or lost muscle tone. They are loose, of course, and appear flattened rather than round. And of course, that is your hypotonia. That's number two. This, of course, is a disorder of the nervous system, which has caused disruptions of the balance of the electrolytes, loss of muscle tone, loss of reduction of the tendon reflexes, atrophy, and degeneration of the muscles. And it's flaccid paralysis. Number three is blank is an increased muscle tone or stiffness associated with an increase in the tendon reflexes and the pathological reflexes, and that's spasticity. Um, Next, you have an autoimmune disease, of course, that causes chronic progressive damage of the neuromuscular junction, and that's your myasthenia. Okay, and which receptors are going to be lost? That's the receptors that are going to be lost are going to be your acetylcholine receptors, and that occurs at about 1 in, of course, 10,000 people. Okay. So they say this one is, of course, is more common in women, typically between the ages of 20 and 40. When it occurs in men, it's usually the onset is about at the age of 50 and 60. Next question. Blake refers to a group of inherited muscle destroying diseases that cause progressive degeneration of the skeletal muscles, and that's your muscular dystrophy. I'll just abbreviate it MD, sorry. Muscular dystrophy. It mostly, of course, is going to strike boys. So exclusively. So it's because the mutated gene is on the X chromosome, and males have only one, of course, of the X chromosome. Number 6, your one for this one, of course, blank is a painful non-articular rheumatic disorder, and that's your fibromyalgia. That's Fibromalgia. And of course, it usually appears between the ages of 25 and 50. And of course, they say there's an estimated 3 million people in the United States that suffer from it, whereas about 15 times more common in women. Blank is a sudden involuntary contraction of a single muscle in a group of muscles, and that's a spasm or muscle spasms. Number 8 is cramp is a painful spasmodic contraction. CRAMP. Sorry, it's kind of hard to write on this board. Number 9, blank is a rhythmic, involuntary, purposeless contraction that produces a quivering or shaking movement. That's going to be a tremor. And number 10, blank is an involuntary brief twitch of an entire motor unit that is visible under the skin. It occurs irregularly and is not associated with movement of the affected muscles, and that's called fasciculation. That's FAS. That's supposed to be ICULATION. Okay, so that is the end of Chapter 9.